There are moments in history when the world seems to hold its breath, when entire civilizations tremble at the approach of an enemy so alien, so terrifying, that resistance feels impossible. For medieval Europe, one such moment came in the 13th century, when the Mongols, the horsemen of the steppe, the storm from the east, burst into the heart of the continent. They came not as wandering raiders, viewed as a disciplined, organized, and relentless war machine, forged in the harshest landscapes on earth and commanded by generals of astonishing brilliance. When their riders first appeared, clad in leather and fur rather than iron and steel, many Europeans dismissed them as barbaric nomads, little more than savages on horseback. But those assumptions dissolved in fire and blood as Mongol armies annihilated kingdoms, shattered knights in open battle, and reduced once proud cities to ash. This is the story of the Mongol invasions of Europe, the moment when Christendom faced a power it did not understand, when kings trembled, when entire nations were left in ruins, and when the course of history itself seemed poised on the edge of destruction. To understand how the Mongols reached Europe, we must begin thousands of miles away, on the endless steppe of Central Asia. The Mongol homeland was a vast and unforgiving land of rolling grasslands, freezing winters, and blistering summers. Survival demanded toughness, resilience, and mobility. The nomadic tribes who lived there were skilled horsemen from childhood, their lives bound to their herds and tough rhythm of the steppe. It was from this world that a boy named Temujin emerged in the late 12th century. His early life was marked by hardship. His father was poisoned, his family abandoned by their tribe, and Temujin grew up in poverty. But through cunning, ferocity, and sheer determination, he began to unite the warring clans of Mongolia. By 1206, he had accomplished what no other leader had achieved, the unification of the Mongol tribes under his leadership. At a great council, he was proclaimed Genghis Khan, universal ruler. The Mongols became more than just a collection of clans. Genghis Khan reorganized them into a disciplined army, built on loyalty, merit, and an iron code of obedience. He introduced a decimal system of organization, units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000 each, commanded by trusted officers. Communication was swift, discipline harsh, and strategy innovative. Their weapons were deceptively simple. The Mongol composite bow, small in auto fire from horseback yet powerful enough to pierce armor, was their deadliest tool. Every warrior carried several horses, allowing them to cover astonishing distances without tiring. Their tactics feigned retreats, encirclements, and coordinated strikes confounded even the most experienced enemies. Genghis Khan unleashed this force upon the world. He conquered northern China, smashed the Khwarezmian Empire in Persia, and pushed deep into Central Asia. By his death in 1227, the Mongols had carved out the beginnings of the largest land empire in history. His successors carried that expansion further still. In the west, one man in particular would become the terror of Europe, Subutai, Genghis Khan's greatest general. Born son of a blacksmith, Subutai rose through brilliance and loyalty, becoming the architect of campaigns that crushed armies many times the size of his own. It was Subutai who conceived the invasion of Europe. Before the Mongols struck at Europe, they first shattered the principalities of the Rus. In the 1230s, the Mongols swept into the lands of modern-day Russia and Ukraine. The Rus princes, divided by rivalries, proved no match for Subutai's disciplined armies. In 1237, the Mongols descended on Ryazan. The city resisted, and for its defiance it was burned to the ground. Other cities met the same fate: Kolomna, Moscow, Vladimir. In 1240, they besieged and captured Kiev, the jewel of the Rus, reducing it to rubble. Chroniclers wrote that of the tens of thousands who once lived there, only a handful survived. With the Rus subdued, the road into Europe lay open. Subutai prepared the next phase of his campaign, a massive invasion aimed at Poland, Hungary, and beyond. In the spring of 1241, the storm struck. A diversionary Mongol force under the generals Baidar and Kadan swept into Poland. Their mission was not simply conquest, but to prevent the Polish princes and their German allies from sending reinforcements to Hungary, where the main Mongol army would soon strike. The Mongols ravaged the countryside, burning towns and spreading panic. On April 9, 1241, they clashed with the combined forces of Duke Henry II of Silesia at Legnica. Henry had rallied Poles, Moravians, and German knights to his banner. Contemporary accounts suggest his army numbered around 30,000. Though many were poorly trained levies, the Mongols fielded perhaps 20,000 but were far more disciplined. The battle was a masterclass in Mongol tactics. They began with a feigned retreat, throwing the eager knights into pursuit. When the Europeans broke formation, the Mongols wheeled around, encircling them and unleashing volleys of arrows. Smoke bombs added to the chaos, confusing men and horses alike. The knights, encumbered by heavy armor, could not match the speed of the steppe cavalry. Units were isolated, surrounded, and cut down. By the battle's end, Duke Henry was slain, his head displayed on a spear to terrify survivors. The Polish resistance was crushed. The victory at Legnica cleared the northern flank for the Mongols and spread terror across Europe. Rumors exaggerated their numbers and taught hundreds of thousands. To many, it seemed the end of Christendom was at hand. While Poland burned, the main Mongol army, led by Genghis Khan and Subutai, advanced into Hungary. King Bela IV had given refuge to the Cumans, nomadic people fleeing the Mongols, and this had provided the pretext for invasion. Bela gathered an immense host, perhaps 60,000 strong, composed of Hungarian nobles, knights, peasants, and foreign allies. Confident in his numbers, he encamped on the Saju River, fortified behind wagons and natural defenses. Subutai, however, had studied his enemy carefully. On the night of April 10, 1241, Mongol engineers stealthily constructed a pontoon bridge across the river. At dawn, while one Mongol force attacked the main bridge head-on, another crossed the hidden bridge and fell upon the Hungarians from the rear. The result was chaos. Trapped within their camp, the Hungarians were showered with arrows and battered by catapults. Panic set in. Knights tried to break out, but the Mongols encircled them. Peasants and soldiers trampled one another in the crush to escape. By the end of April 11, the Hungarian army was annihilated. King Bela barely escaped with his life. Fleeing westward, Hungary was left defenseless. For the next year, Hungary endured any of the most brutal occupations in its history. Mongol forces spread out across the kingdom, burning towns, massacring inhabitants, and seizing supplies. Archaeological evidence shows widespread destruction. With countless settlements abandoned, chroniclers describe fields left unplanted, rivers filled with corpses, and monasteries reduced to ashes. It is estimated that a quarter to a third of Hungary's population perished. Survivors fled to mountain strongholds, forests, or walled cities. Yet even castles proved vulnerable, for the Mongols brought with them siege engineers, captured Chinese, Persians, and others who could build catapults, trebuchets, and siege towers capable of battering down European fortifications. The terror spread beyond Hungary. Austria, Bohemia, and the Holy Roman Empire braced for invasion. Pope Gregory IX called for unity, but Europe was divided, weakened by rivalries and wars. Had the Mongols continued their advance, nothing seemed capable of stopping them. And then, just as suddenly as they had arrived, the Mongols withdrew. In 1242, they abandoned Hungary, pulling back across the steppe. Europe was left stunned, unable to believe its fortune. Why did they leave? The most accepted explanation is the death of Genghis Khan, the Great Khan in Mongolia. According to Mongol tradition, the princes were required to return to Mongolia for the Kurultai, the council to elect a new ruler. Batukan and his generals, despite their victories, turned back to participate in the succession. Other theories suggest that Europe's forests, stone castles, and fractured supply lines made conquest less practical. Yet given their success so far, it is entirely possible that had Genghis lived longer, the Mongols might have pressed deeper into Europe, perhaps even as far as Vienna, Paris, or beyond. The devastation in Eastern Europe was immense. Hungary lay in ruins, its recovery taking decades. Villages vanished from the map. Fields went untilled. Survivors were left scarred by the memory of slaughter. But the Mongol invasions also left subtler marks. European rulers realized the vulnerability of their kingdoms. Stone fortifications replaced wooden ones. Armies were reorganized, with greater emphasis on mobility and archery. The myth of the invincible knight, clad in heavy armor, was shattered by the Mongols' demonstration of speed, strategy, and coordination. Diplomatic contacts with the Mongols also began. Some rulers sought alliances, hoping to turn the Mongols against their Muslim rivals in the Middle East. Envoys traveled between Europe and the Mongol court. The Franciscan friar Giovanni d'Appian del Carpini journeyed to Karakorum, leaving behind one of the earliest open accounts of the Mongols. Later, others such as William of Rubruck would do the same. Through these encounters, Europe gained knowledge of lands far beyond its borders, laying the groundwork for later exploration and trade. The Mongol invasions of Europe, though brief, were transformative. They demonstrated the fragility of medieval kingdoms and the power of a disciplined, organized military system. They opened up channels of communication between East and West, setting the stage for the later Silk Road exchanges. But they also instilled a deep, lingering fear. For generations, the Tatars, as Europeans often called them, were remembered as horsemen of the apocalypse, agents of divine punishment. Chroniclers described them as inhuman, as demons, as the scourge of God. The memory of burning cities and shattered armies remained etched into the consciousness of Europe. The Mongol Empire did not conquer Europe, but its shadow fell long across the continent. The invasions revealed both the strength and the weakness of Christendom. They sparked reforms, inspired caution, and reminded Europeans that the world was far larger and far more dangerous than they had imagined. In time, trade routes reopened, and the Mongol peace, the Pax Mongolica, allowed goods, ideas, and travelers to move across Eurasia with unprecedented safety. Marco Polo would later journey to the court of Kublai Khan, bringing back tales that fired the imagination of Europe. Yet always, lurking behind these exchanges, was the memory of the horsemen who had once threatened to reduce Europe itself to ashes. The Mongol invasions of Europe were like a storm, sudden, violent, and devastating. In just a few years, they burned cities, slaughtered armies, and left scars that would take generations to heal. And then, as quickly as they had come, they were gone. Fate intervened, and Europe was spared total conquest. But the memory endured: the thunder of hooves across the steppe, the hiss of arrows in the air, the black banners on the horizon. For a brief and terrifying moment in the 13th century, all of Christendom trembled before the Mongol horsemen. This was the storm from the east, that fire that swept through Europe, and the world has never forgotten it.